Hi, everybody. Whoa. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. This class, every year, they work really hard on putting something together as we learn through the year. So let me just give you a little bit of an explanation, and then I want to be short because this is all theirs. So each year, our 8th grade students learn about the history and the impact of the Holocaust and why, as Jews, it's vital to create a personal connection. In religious school, we learn about the Shoah in a very different way from public school. In public school, it's a unit on World War II, and it's been very interesting to listen to them comment on how different the learning is here versus in the school. So many started the year having a distant academic leak. All right, I give up. Many started the year having a distant and academic link to this important and devastating time in Jewish history. This is a new generation. Most are connected to the Holocaust through great-grandparents, and some aren't aware of their family history. In our generation, it was a closer connection in the family tree. So in order to be able to connect personally, this past year, we used many different means and media to make our learning more impactful. We heard firsthand accounts from multiple Holocaust survivors. We took a virtual tour of Yad Vashem. It was actually the children's wing and really interesting. We had our own Holocaust museum here at Kol Ami, thanks to the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center. And you can see on the inside cover, as we were going through the museum, the 8th graders all wrote notes how they responded, what was surprising, what was new information, and you can see some of their responses there. We watched and discussed deeper meanings from the movie Jojo Rabbit. And for the first time, we used social media to connect to a multitude of stories. And you'll see that integrated into this program this evening. We also baked a recipe, believe it or not, of a food that kept people going in the camps, and there'll be more on that later. We also approached the Holocaust in some indirect ways. We learned about racism from the personal stories of Mediha Tubman and her son Abdul. We read and interpreted the folktale The Emperor's New Clothes and examined our personal feelings and experiences with the effects of groupthink, single stories, and peer pressure. All of this helped us to understand that it's difficult for most people to stand up against the majority, even when the stakes are seemingly small. As is evidenced by the writings of the 8th graders for this program, I can confidently say that every student feels more emotionally and personally connected to the Holocaust. They feel the responsibility to bear witness and carry the stories to others in their generation and on to the next. Each 8th grader created a segment about a person, event, feeling, or piece of history connected to the Holocaust that has personal meaning to them. I hope you find meaning and hope in these.
What do you imagine when you hear that someone created a memorial to the victims of the Holocaust? A large building, velvet ropes, museum-ish? I'd like to tell you about a memorial to the Holocaust victims called the Stolperstein. These stumbling stones are small brass markers which each one name engraved to honor their memory. You will see it only as you come upon it. If you are looking down and notice something different among the other stones in the street, you will have to almost literally stumble across it. Today, the Stolperstein exists in 20 languages and 24 countries and honor all the victims of the Nazi regime. There are more than 70,000 memorial blocks laid in more than 1,200 cities and towns across Europe and Russia. Each commemorates a victim outside their last known, freely chosen residence. The inscription on each stone begins, "Here lived," following the victim's name, date of birth, and fate. Internment, suicide, exile, or the vast majority of cases, deportation and murder. Together, the Stolperstein now constitute the largest decentralized monument in the world.
The idea was first conceived by artist Gunther Demnig in Cologne 30 years ago in 1992. He has now laid over 70,000 stones, personally overseeing the wording and installation of each one. A person is only forgotten when his or her name is forgotten, he often says, citing the Talmud. As an integral part of our learning, we use social media to hear individual stories. Humans of Judaism, Holocaust survivor stories, Stolperstein.app are some of the Instagram feeds that provide personalized stories related to that particular date in history. This has helped us to understand the personal magnitude of the Holocaust, no matter how brief or incomplete they lived, and that is worth remembering. Throughout our service, you will hear brief snippets of people's stories, some enshrined in the Stolperstein, some existing only on social media, and some more well-known. May all of their memories be blessings.
I am Selba Stibbe Frank. I was born on April 2nd, 1909. Around April 30th, 1945, I was murdered in Bergen-Belsen by the Nazis because I was Jewish. I was 36 years old. During the war, I lived in the Netherlands and Amsterdam at the Wallstraat 47-I. A Stolperstein has been placed for me at my address.
I am Jacques Petrus Johannes Zillesen. I was born on March 28, 1903. Around October 24, 1944, I was murdered in Amsterdam by the Nazis because I was a resistance fighter. I was 41 years old. During the war, I lived in the Netherlands in Amsterdam at Mamaroneck 56.
Over the course of this year, I have heard multiple stories about life during the Holocaust from survivors. The main thing that stuck with me is the hunger and starvation that the Jews had to go through. Maybe they would get a small piece of bread or something like that, but that is pretty much it. Some mothers would give their food to children, which I think was such a brave thing to do. A few months ago, I baked a food called bilkelach, which is a challah-ish type of thing. I remember a story about how a man was starving and had not had enough food in so long. Every day, the man thought about bilkelach, and somehow that kept him alive and going. I think that the fact that something as small as this can keep a man motivated shows how courageous and brave the Jews were at the time. Mothers and children all stuck in a camp with no food to last them or to spare, nothing left to eat, no hope that others would share. Each day was another chance to starve. Trying not to die was too hard, but yet they still went through the time. It all started on that big line, separated. Some lost their lives, all because the Nazis wanted one kind. They had a specific view, blue eyes, blonde hair too. Their numbers became a tattoo. They wanted to erase the Jews, and to this day, it leaves me confused.
I am Jacob Liefsma. I was born on March 28, 1935, around February 11, 1944. I was murdered in Auschwitz by the Nazis because I was Jewish. I was just 8 years old. During the war, I lived in the Netherlands at the Langewall 28. A Stolperstein has been placed for me at my address.
Wherever books are burned, human beings are destined to be burned too. These words, written by German Jewish poet Heinrich Heine more than 100 years before the events of the Holocaust, are frighteningly accurate. Books are important to humans. We've been writing them for thousands of years, and they've always shared ideas, opinions, and facts. But of course, when dealing with ideas, opinions, and facts, as well as humans, someone's bound to get angry. Someone's bound to try to destroy the work of others. We've seen it time and time again. Through history, book burning has been used to silence and censor people and ideas. It is a public statement of control. And what is more censoring and controlling than the Nazi regime? Over the course of the Holocaust, so many books were burned, many of them during the Berlin book burning. On May 10, 1933, a crowd of 40,000 gathered to burn over 25,000 books on a university campus in Germany. The books, which were deemed un-German, included books by authors such as Albert Einstein, Leo Tolstoy, Helen Keller, and Ernest Hemingway. They did not only throw books from public libraries and universities into the fire, but they also took them from private bookshelves and collections. I love books. I love reading, immersing myself in different stories, cultures, places. From my own bedroom, I can be anywhere. I can be in London. I can be in Australia. I can be on Mars. That is the freedom that books give me, that I have. I cannot imagine a life without books, even without the freedom to choose my own books. I don't even think someone who doesn't like reading could imagine that, to not have that freedom. This may seem small compared to, 11 million deaths, but this was just the beginning. It shows how fast everything happened. This was 1933. At the same time, people were just starting to be forced into concentration camps. 4 months prior, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Everything happened at the same time, and this really put that into perspective for me. Imagine being threatened by words. Imagine feeling threatened by paper. Paper and ink, maybe some glue. That's all books are, but that threatened the Nazis. The destructive force that took books, took human rights, took lives. Wherever books are burned, human beings are destined to be burned too.
During her enlistment in the British Army, Hannah Senesh underwent parachute training, becoming one of the 37 volunteer paratroopers from Eretz Israel and one of 3 women who requested to parachute into occupied Europe in order to help their Jewish brethren. In March 1944, she parachuted into Yugoslavia along with 3 other paratroopers from Eretz Israel. 3 months later, Hannah crossed the border into Hungary and was caught several hours later in the possession of a transmitter. Hannah was transferred to a prison and then to jail in Budapest. She was subjected to horrific torture and threats on her mother's life, but she did not reveal the radio codes. Hannah Senesh's imprisonment lasted 5 months. On November 7, 1944, Hannah Senesh was executed by firing squad, having been found guilty of treason against Hungary. She was 23 years old.
In Germany during the Holocaust, there were Jews being threatened, terrorized, and killed. If they managed to stay alive, each day was met with inhumane working, eating, and living conditions. Most of the labor was backbreaking and unsafe. Prisoners had to build and practically maintain their own camps. Labor was a way of punishing prisoners. Often pointless work was forced upon them to torment the Jews. Early prisoners were forced to work at brickworks and quarries. Countless prisoners were worked to death. They were forced to work at these camps all day with no breaks in the scorching sun or the freezing cold. The prisoners were starved. They didn't get much food and were lucky if they got a bit more than usual. Were you at the front of the line and got a bigger sip of soup than those at the end when there wasn't any left? Did your ladler happen to grab a potato from the bottom of the soup pot? Was the little food you saved stolen in the middle of the night while you got a precious few hours of sleep? Even then, there was no comfort. Beds, where 5 or more prisoners slept to one bed, were made of wood and maybe covered in hay, where lice and rats thrived. Other diseases, dysentery, typhoid, malaria, and many more infectious diseases spread through these camps. For many prisoners, this led to sickness, weakness, and finally death. It's impossible for me to imagine how anyone survived.
I am Veronica Wolf Bermier. I was born on April 3, 1914. Around June 4, 1943, I was murdered in Sobibor by the Nazis because I was Jewish. I was 29 years old. During the war, I lived in the Netherlands in Amsterdam at the Leidsecade 103. A stolper sign has been placed for me at my address.
I can't even imagine what the Jews were thinking or how they were feeling when they were just told to hide, or when they were in the concentration camps, or when they could see their parents, children, relatives, or lifelong friends getting shot or stabbed 50 feet in front of them. There were hundreds or thousands of people getting tortured so much that they were willing to kill themselves at any moment. The anxiety and thoughts in the backs of their mind that they might not ever get to see their children, mom, dad, or grandparents ever again was so frightening. Out of the few survivors of the Holocaust, many are too scared to talk about how they felt. But with the few I've gotten the lucky chance to hear from, they said it was the most horrible thing any human could ever imagine, and their stomachs churn anytime they think about it. It was so hard to connect this to my life, but the one time I ever even came close to feeling that way was when there was just a lockdown in the elementary school. I was young. All I really knew about lockdowns was school shootings, so my mind went to straight to, am I going to die? I was so scared that I wanted to throw up. And then it was over, and my life just went back to normal. All I can imagine is that feeling 100 times worse with no end in sight, and that's what they probably felt.
Holocaust survivor Mira Rosenblatt was born in 1923 in Sosnowiec, Poland. Growing up, Mira was a precocious young girl with a thirst for adventure and a natural sense of leadership. When the Nazis came to power, she always did everything she could to help those around her, even when she could barely help herself. In August 1942, after 2 years of living in the ghetto, all the Jews of Sosnowiec were ordered to report to the stadium. On that day, Mira was separated from her family and never saw them again. She was selected for labor and was deported to Grünberg, which was part of the Gross-Rosen concentration camp complex. For 3 years, Mira worked as a slave laborer in a dangerous factory under the surveillance of cruel and violent guards. In late January 1945, she was forced to join the infamous Death March. After 2 weeks of marching in below freezing temperatures, Mira saw a chance to escape when a Nazi looked away. She took her chance and ran. For the remainder of the war, Mira survived by hiding in the forest and concealing her true identity. Today, Mira's memories remain vivid, and she believes she survived to tell her story.
A few months ago, I had the opportunity to listen to a Holocaust survivor named Esther speak to my class. I took this as a chance to realize how much I have been missing from this tragic event. I have only really read or heard about stories from other people, never from a person retelling their story right in front of me. I just can't comprehend how or why this has happened, but I guess I won't know. I hope I never have to hear the suffering in her voice as she recalled tragic events. Hearing how much pain and tragedy these people, just like me, had to go through just because they were Jewish had changed my perspective on simple things immensely. I wrote this poem because I wanted to take Esther's story and make it my own, but keep the meaning and soul in it as well. I know that Esther would want others to tell her story, knowing how meaningful it is. I hope I can be one of them. It was late, it was dark, it was quick. It started but never stopped. 6 million gone, erased, but not forgotten. Who would have the heart to do such a thing? They were hungry, they were bare, they were in pain. They were in need of something that wasn't to come. One dropped dead, then many more to come, till 6 million was just a number, not the number of Jews that were dead.
Mark Schoenwetter is a Polish Holocaust survivor. But along with telling his story, Mark focuses on spreading happiness and awareness through his story. Something unique about Mark is that he survived the Holocaust by hiding in a variety of different places, such as a forest, an attic, and even a pigsty. After the war ended in 1945, Mark came to America where he got married and had 2 daughters. Today he is spreading his story all around the world from people young to old. His main goal is for people to be kind and never forget. This is because if it weren't for the kind people who let him and his family stay in their household, he would not be here today. He also pointed out that many people do not get properly educated on the Holocaust, so now is our chance to educate as many people as we can. Mark's story is very similar to someone in my family's survival story, specifically my great-uncle Gerard. He escaped the Nazis in Poland in around 1940. He was fortunate. Not a lot of people were that fortunate, and that is why we gather here tonight. We are here to remember them and to remember their stories. Once my great-uncle Gerard had passed through Ellis Island, he started to work and soon met my great-aunt Anita. After getting married, they went to Boston and started a family there. I never had the good fortune of actually getting to know Gerard or hear his story directly from him, but I know that he was a great man who was lucky enough to escape one of the worst tragedies in human history. This personal connection makes it important to me to share the stories of those who survived and those who didn't.
I'm Kurt Israelitz. I was born on April 27, 1922. Around September 30th, 1942, I was murdered in Auschwitz by the Nazis because I was Jewish. I was 20 years old. During the war, I lived in the Netherlands in Hilversum at the Havenstraat 101. A stopper sign has been placed for me at my address.
We chose the song Le Dor Vador to sing at tonight's service because of how well it relates to all aspects of Judaism. It mentions the importance of an individual and explains that God and significance are within us all. But most importantly, it uses the words Le Dor Vador from generation to generation, which, to me, means that we are all connected to the past, the good and bad. Parts of our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents make us who we are, and even the Holocaust and the people it affected have an effect on us. Through their stories, we can feel more connected to our ancestors, the past, and Judaism as a whole. It can be hard to find the good in such a horrible time period, but learning about what our ancestors were able to overcome and the kindness they showed to those in need can make our connection to Judaism and our past stronger. We learn so much from the moments and people that came before us, and our memories help us build ourselves, others, and the future.
We are gifts, we are blessings, we are history in song. We are hope, and we are healing, we are learning to be strong. We are words, and we are stories. We are pictures of the past. We are carriers of wisdom, not the first and not the last. Lador vador nagid god lecha. Lador vador, we protect this chain. From generation to generation, Lador Vador, these lips will praise your name.
The Nazis stole his bar mitzvah. Now he's finally reclaimed it. My grandparents were from a shtetl in Ukraine. When the pogroms began, they escaped to the Rostov region in search of safety. My grandfather, Leib, was a pious Jew. He wrapped tefillin each morning and prayed with great vigor. When I was born, Zadie insisted that I undergo a bris. He named me Moshe. Zadie was a proud Jew and was determined to pass on the traditions to us kids. Times were difficult, but we had a big and happy Jewish family. But then the Nazis came. They destroyed our family. Zadie was the first to die, the night the bombings began. Then they came for my bubby Sarah and her children and her granddaughter, my first cousin. They wiped out our entire family. When I turned 13, Zadie wasn't around to teach me to lay tefillin, so I never had a bar mitzvah. But today, at the age of 88, I am finally wrapping tefillin for the very first time in memory of Zadie, Bubby, and our entire family. The Nazis are gone, but we are still here. Israel Chai.
This year, when learning about the Holocaust in my 8th grade religious school class, I realized how much there is to learn about the Holocaust and how little I knew. I've been coming to religious school since kindergarten, and I've been learning about Judaism since birth. I thought that I knew a lot about the Holocaust because I always knew way more than my school friends and more than most of my public school teachers. But there is so much more to learn about and know. This has made me wonder, what does the rest of the world know? It's very dangerous for a society to lack knowledge about this history. If people are uneducated about the Holocaust, it could cause something similar to occur, and it's scary to live in a world like that. Maybe this lack of understanding is what has allowed for present-day atrocities such as the war in Ukraine and the genocide of many people. It is important to tell stories and pass on information to future generations so that people understand their responsibility and obligation in preventing this kind of thing from happening. One of the stories I learned this year that impacted me was Esther's story. She was born and raised in Lund, Poland, and at the age of 12 or 13, Nazis came into her neighborhood and took her and her family away from their home. They didn't know what was going to happen to them or where they were going. They arrived at a concentration camp, and after 2 days in the cattle car, she was immediately separated from her brother and father and was left with her mother. Her mother went to the left, and she was directed towards the right. She tried to sneak back to the left to be with her mom, however, a Jewish inmate stopped her. This woman saved her life because the line on the left went straight to the gas chambers. Esther never saw her mother again. There's a lot more to Esther's story, however, this was the part that especially stood out to me. As sad as the story is, the inmate or the hero of the story gives me hope. It's important as we tell these stories that are hard to hear that we also focus on the many who helped, who supported, and who saved lives. Now I wonder how we today can be like this woman. I have learned so much this year, and I want to learn more. I want to spread stories and keep the world educated. I am part of the last generation that will be able to hear a survivor's story in person, and I understand that it is now my responsibility to keep these stories alive.
Magdalene Mira Lebnitz was born in 1916 to a prominent family in southwestern Germany near Stuttgart. In the early 1930s, she began attending prep school, but soon her family and friends began noticing changes in her behavior. As a result, Magdalene left school in 1935. She was later diagnosed with schizophrenia, and in 1938, her family placed her in a private clinic. About a year later, the Nazis started enacting their secret euthanasia program. The program aimed to kill people with mental and physical disabilities living in institutions. In the Nazi view, this would cleanse the Aryan race of people considered genetically defective and a financial burden to society. In 1941, Magdalene was secretly transferred to Hadamar, one of 6 euthanasia gassing facilities throughout Nazi Germany. Her parents received a letter indicating she had died of tuberculosis. In reality, she was murdered by gassing at the age of 25. She is one of approximately 250,000 people with disabilities who were murdered by the Nazi regime as part of the euthanasia program.
Rose Janowicz, which is second from the left in the photograph, was my great-great-grandma. She was born in 1896 in Grodno, Poland. She had 2 sisters, Henia and Lila. Rose and Henia immigrated to New York on a boat that arrived in Castle Gardens in New York Harbor, which was pre-Ellis Island. Lila had immigrated to the U.S. years before. Henia did not like life in America, so she moved back to Poland, where she was later killed in the Holocaust. My great-great-grandma Rose married Alexander Mallet, who was a house painter. Rose and Alexander had 7 children, one of which is my great-grandma Florence, which is farthest left on the photograph, who was born in the U.S. in 1921. Third from the left is my grandma Arlene, and next to her is my mom. My mom is so happy to share this family story with me. Putting our own family names to the Jewish life before and during the Holocaust makes the history of the Jewish people personal. I feel so lucky that I met my great-grandma and that we have this amazing picture of 4 generations.
Holocaust survivor Rachel Roth was born in 1926 in Warsaw, Poland. She was just 13 when the Nazis invaded and her family was confined to the Warsaw Ghetto. They hid in a secret bunker, but Rachel's mother and 3 siblings were all caught and sent to their deaths. Rachel remained until the uprising, in which she actively participated by smuggling in weapons to help the resistors. Once caught, she was deported to Mamaroneck, followed by Auschwitz. Upon her arrival, Rachel was shaved and tattooed with the number 48915. Below the number was a small triangle, half a Star of David, to show she was a Jew. She worked as a slave laborer for nearly 2 years and was then shipped by cattle car to Bergen-Belsen, where she was finally liberated in April 1945. After the war, Rachel made her way to Paris, where she waited for the papers to allow her entry into Eretz Israel.
They took me out of line. They sat me down. They started tattooing my arm. I felt the sharp pain, tears falling like rain. From my eyes, I despised these Nazis. 7098678, I hate. I don't look human anymore. We're in the belly of the beast, roar. They starved me, I can hardly walk, I can hardly talk. They hunt us down, each and every last one, until it's all over and done. Now 10 years later, I still bear this mark, as a reminder to never repeat, and I bear the mark of the beast.
I am Joshua Klein. I was born on April 3, 1901. Around July 6, 1942, I was murdered in Mauthausen by the Nazis because I was Jewish. I was 41 years old. During the war, I lived in the Netherlands in Scarsdale at Skemskade 6. A stolper sign has been placed for me at my address.
This year, I learned a lot about the Holocaust, and I heard a couple of people's individual stories. It is amazing that I am still able to hear stories from people that actually experienced it. We are one of the last generations to hear firsthand stories, so it is very important to remember them and keep telling them. One story that stood out to me was Esther Guysolves. She was born in Lodz, Poland, and at age 12 or 13, the Nazis came and invaded her town and took her family. She and her family were taken to a concentration camp where she was immediately separated from her brother and father. She and her mother were together. Esther's mom was sent to the left, and Esther was directed to the right. Not knowing what the lines meant, Esther tried to sneak into the line that her mom was in, but a Jewish inmate stopped her and told her not to go there, because the inmate knew that people in that line were headed straight towards death. Her story stood out to me because if it wasn't for that one inmate, Esther would have died. Her life would have been over and nothing would have been the same if it wasn't for that small act that happened in a matter of seconds. This connects to our everyday life because people could have an impact on someone that could change their life for the better. It doesn't have to be something as big as what the inmate did, but doing a kind act every day can improve your life and others. Performing mitzvot can benefit someone else's life and make you feel good about what you did. There are many things that people can do in life to improve someone else's. For example, when someone passes you, you could smile or hold the door or compliment them. You never know what someone is going through, and the little things can really help them. Overall, Esther's story was very interesting and meaningful, and people should continue to learn and discuss the Holocaust. It is our responsibility to make sure that no one ever forgets and everyone knows what really occurred. Also, the world could be a much better place if everyone tries to accomplish one act of kindness every day.
As a child, I hated soldiers in uniform. They scared me very much. I never thought there would be a time that I would love soldiers. As you hold my hand while wearing the uniform of the Israel Defense Forces paratroopers wing is pinned on your shirt and a pair of paratroopers boots on your feet, I am overwhelmed with emotion that I can't keep inside. You're a paratrooper and I float in the air, pinching myself to make sure it's not a dream. My heart is filled with pride and such incredible love. I feel like a soldier myself. I fought for my life, I fought for my sanity, I fought to be a person again, and I really fought and dreamed to have a big family. So today, I stand up tall and salute you. Holocaust survivor Hannah Tessler, 96 years old, to her granddaughter Shira, a parachuting instructor in the IDF Paratroopers Brigade.
Ervin Abadi, a Hungarian Jew from Budapest, was an aspiring young artist when World War II began. He was drafted into the Hungarian labor service in the early 1940s. Adabi managed to escape, but was recaptured and immediately deported to Bergen-Belsen. When the camp was liberated, his condition was such that he required extended hospitalization. During his convalescence, he created dozens of works of Holocaust art. This drawing has more meaning to me than most. The image depicts the yearning for escape from the inhuman conditions of concentration camps during the Holocaust. My great-grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and to even remotely imagine what they went through is a great difficulty, along with being deeply sorrowing. When I learned the things that people went through, I felt hatred and confusion on how this could have happened. The Nazis were able to continue the Holocaust under the mask of war, but as soon as Germany was invaded, the horrors of the Holocaust came to light. Drawings like these are important because they allow us to never permit something like this to happen ever again.
I'm Isaac Van Dam. I was born April 12, 1941. Around September 10, 1943, I was murdered in Auschwitz by the Nazis because I was Jewish. I was just 2 years old. During the war, I lived in the Netherlands in the leak at the Schweierschuk 26. A stopper sign has been placed for me at my address.
Candle lighting is a traditional component of Jewish remembrance rituals. Candles have a long history as memorial lights and as symbols of life. We typically light in memory of close relatives who have died. We say that we remember their lives mattered and continue to matter to us. We light candles on Yom HaShoah. In memory of the 1.5 million innocent children whose lives were extinguished in the cruelest way. In memory of all the 6 million Jews who were cruelly tortured, dehumanized, starved, shot, gassed, beaten for the simple reason that they were Jews. In memory of all the righteous among the nations who risked their lives to save and protect their Jewish brothers and sisters. In memory of all the brave souls who perished offering physical and spiritual resistance, not in expectation of conquest, but for honor and glory of the Jewish people. In memory of all those men, women, and children who have no one else to remember them or say Kaddish for them, whose very names have been erased, but whose memory lives on in our hearts and in our thoughts. In memory of those who risked their lives to help others for the simple but profound reason that it was the right thing to do. As a promise to keep all of their memories alive as we continue to tell their stories to our future children and others and show our resistance by living meaningful Jewish lives.
Before we say the mourner's Kaddish, I'd like to mention 2 names, these candles and the mourner's Kaddish, in the memory of Chaya Goldstein and also David Goldstein. These are 2 names of unfortunately too many And if you would like to say the names of people that you know or are related to, before we say the Mourner's Kaddish, during, if you want to keep them in your minds and hearts as we're saying it. But we'll just give you a few seconds for that, and then we'll continue.
To honor the memories of those who died in the Holocaust, we now rise and say the Mourner's Kaddish together. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabbah, be'elma divrachu te v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechon u'v'yamechon u'v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mivarach le'olam ololmei olmaya. Yit barach v'yishtabach v'yit pa'ar v'yit ramam v'yit naseh. V'yit hadar v'yit aleh v'yit Allah shemei dekudashah b'rechu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'elma v'imru amen. Yehei shla marapa min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'el kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, Hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'el kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Will you come over and sing?
History in song. We are hope, we are healing, we are learning to be strong. We are words and we are stories, we are pictures of the past. We are carriers of wisdom, not the first and not the last. Join with us. Lador vador nagid god lecha. Lador vador, we protect this chain from generation to generation. Lador vador, these lips will praise your name.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I really commend and am so proud of these 8th graders. They put a lot of thought, a lot of heart, a lot of work, and a lot of themselves into this program, and I hope that you found something meaningful or new or learning or feeling from all of this. Well done, guys.